Hello friends, and welcome to my today's lecture, that is the second part of Mrs. Ramsay's character in Virginia Woolf's novel To the Lighthouse. In my earlier lecture, I had mentioned Mrs. Ramsay as an image of fertility and softness, as a character who is constantly present, not only as worldly present, but also in the minds of the characters. Now, she was, as we see in the novel, a very beautiful, charming, and a nurturing personality who holds the Ramsay family together, Like every social context she enters by her charisma and instincts for putting people at ease. We also saw that she was a very good wife and a creator of comfort for everyone. She has the ability to bring together disparate things into a whole. As has been depicted, I had also mentioned that Mrs. Ramsay lies at the center of the family, or she acts as a central character. She is highly domestic, focusing on her roles as a wife and a mother of 8 children. She is a critical thinker of a different sort than is usually expected, and she also has the talent of bringing people together. Now, Mrs. Ramsay, she's a virtuous soul, and she has been depicted as an ideal woman of the Victorian society, which coined a new phrase for her, angel in the house. And she actually is an angel in the house. I had also mentioned a famous shloka in Sanskrit for the women like her, and that shloka, Mrs. Ramsay completely befits into that shloka. I had also mentioned that this novel could be viewed as full of symbolism, and which describes the surroundings and the life of Mrs. Ramsay. From the very beginning of the novel, we see that she has always emerged as a woman not only of great kindness and tolerance, but also as a protector who tries to protect her son James at every point of time. Now, Mrs. Ram, today I'll be talking about the remaining qualities that are attributed to Mrs. Ramsay in her character sketch. Now, Mrs. Ramsay has also been called a united force, both structurally and psychologically. In the novel, she's a living, breathing reality, and also one of the finest creations of Virginia Woolf. She acts as a structural and psychological center of the novel and the source of unity in it. Now, in the very first chapter, we see that she has been placed at such a point where all the characters move in and out, up and down, but she acts as a reference to them sitting at one place in between. She serves as a model for Lily's painting on the lawn. Now, there are many guests in the house, all of different varieties, but even if they are gathered or assembled together in that one house, they are scattered like stones, or they are like scattered stones if all of them are put together. Now, the job of bringing these stones together, constructing and reconstructing, is done by Mrs. Ramsay. All the characters are comfortable in their own shells and do not wish to communicate with each other even at dinner time. Mrs. Ramsay is able to weave all of them into a cohesive whole so that each one of them, all being self-willed and self-centered or centric, is brought out. Each one of the characters is brought out of his isolation and made to be actually together and feels at home. As we see, Mrs. Ramsay, by her looks, compels Lily to be considerate to Charles Tansley, due to which Charles Tansley, getting the much needed attention, he comes out of his isolation and feels at home. Even Mr. Carmichael is brought out of himself by the beauty of the bowl of fruit at the center of the table. We also see, as an essential quality of a character, that she gives complete sympathy and encouragement to Mr. Ramsay because she knows that he is totally dependent on her. He needs to be understood and reassured every now and then. And he too knows that it is only she who possesses a different kind of power and strength. She constantly boosts the badly needed self-confidence of Mr. Ramsay. Now, Mrs. Ramsay is also a perfect hostess, as the novel exhibits her to be. We have read through the novel and know that the amount of guests that are there in her house, even though this Ramsay family, they have a very meager income, but still she's been able to feed and look after so many guests. She not only arranges for people's lodging and boarding, but also looks after them to their satisfaction. And all the guests are attracted towards her. She has nothing against any of them. Moreover, she has sympathy for people who are otherwise hated, like Charles Tansley. Now, it has been very rightly said that without her, the whole household would have been disintegrated. In the end, when we see that Mrs. Ramsay, she's a dominating figure all throughout the novel and even after her death. Though she is physically present only till the first part, she does not make her existence or her presence show, but even after her death. After the first part, when she is no more, she remains in each one's memory. Her husband remembers her and undertakes the journey to the lighthouse in order to fulfill one of her cherished wishes. Lily also remembers her. She has visions of her sitting at the window, just as she used to do in life. And this vision helps Lily to complete the picture at the very moment when Mr. Ramsay lands at the lighthouse. Now, in the last part of the novel also, we see that she's constantly presented through Lily Briscoe's consciousness, and her full significance as a uniting force is brought out. So we see that Mrs. Ramsay rises from death and lives again. Mrs. Ramsay dead is more powerful than Mrs. Ramsay living. In part 1, she herself, and in part 2, her spirit dominates the novel. That is all for the character sketch of Mrs. Ramsay. I'll be coming up with more character sketches and other aspects of the novel To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. Till then, goodbye and thank you, friends.